For you, the listeners of My JavaScript Story, Loot Crate is offering an opportunity to save 10% on any new subscription at lootcrate.com. Just enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings. Loot Crate is one of my favorite things. Every month I get a box in the mail, costs less than $20, and it comes with all kinds of goodies. I have stuff from, just looking at my shelf, Batman, Spider-Man, Ninja Turtles, Back to the Future, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and much, much more. So if you're a geek, a gamer, anything like that, and you want cool stuff to put around your office, cool t-shirts, comic books, etc., then definitely check out Loot Crate. To save 10% on your new subscription, go to lootcrate.com/Ruby. Again, that's lootcrate.com/Ruby to save 10% on any new subscription. Enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings. Hey everybody, and welcome to another My JavaScript Story. This week we're talking to J Sofer. Dean, do you want to say hello?
Hi everybody, I'm Dean.
Now you were on episode 95 of JavaScript Jabber. We talked about Angular UI. We should probably have you back on Adventures in Angular.
Maybe, but I'm actually not active in Angular anymore.
Oh, cool. Well, we'll dig into that then.
Okay.
But yeah, so if you want to hear from Dean, you can go check out episode 95. That was quite a while ago. It was, 3-4 years ago?
Yeah. Angular has changed, and I've forked my interests.
Gotcha. So do you want to just give people a quick idea of who you are, what you do, why you're famous, all that good stuff?
Yeah. Well, grew up in Orange County and kind of jack of all trades, master of none. And pretty much I procrastinated in college while studying mechanical engineering by programming and doing scripts. And
Nice.
Yeah. And then I just realized that I like programming, like engineering. So I kind of been doing that, did consulting, freelance, portfolio web pages for like aspiring actors in Hollywood. And then projects got bigger and the scale of my work got bigger. And you kind of start with dabbling in front end and JavaScript and HTML, and then you do full stack with MVC, and then you kind of go into like JavaScript everything these days. And now I worked at a couple of tech startups in San Francisco, and now I'm actually at PlayStation. And I used to be really into open source, but I've kind of taken a step back from that and just kind of get my day work done.
Nice. I know people are going to ask this, so I'm just going to ask it. If you work at PlayStation, do you get free consoles and games and stuff?
We get really nice discounts. And if you're looking for a job at PlayStation, you should hit me up on any PM medium you can find me on. And not for swag, but for employment. And
I love the
we get some pretty cool perks.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
But yeah, and the thing for me was like, I started off doing tech startups. Like I've been the 10th employee at a company, the 40th employee at a company, and in San Francisco, and I would work like 60 to 80 hours a week, including weekends. And I was just super passionate about the projects, but I realized if the leadership didn't have any clue what they were doing, then it would tend to just be really frustrating because they wouldn't listen to you. And I decided if I'm not going to get listened to, I might as well work at a large corporation where I can really just be the cog in the wheel and get the perks and focus more on my social and personal and creative life rather than investing all my time and energy into work.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, I did send you a list of questions. We're probably going to come back around to some of this, but let's dive in and get your story. The first question that I typically ask is, how did you get into programming? And you kind of talked about some things. I don't know if that's where you started, though. So where did you get your start in programming?
Well, I kind of dove into computers from my dad because he started off being really into tech, introduced me like the days of DOS. And I feel like a lot of people, I started with scripting. I was trying to build I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, always got to fix problems I see and build solutions. And I would build like a media catalog script for some stuff at college. I created a website which allowed people to sign up to host radio talk shows on a radio station I started in college. And doing portfolio websites because I was picking up HTML and CSS and fooling around, making stuff for me and my friends. And after I got good at it, people started offering to pay me and just kind of stepping up my game, switching to full stack knowledge, picked up Cake PHP. So I started with like HTML, CSS, usually reverse engineering themes I found, then applying PHP and databases, and then getting frustrated at how tedious it was. I was introduced to MVC, and then MVC kind of like stepped up my game. And after a while, I left Cake PHP because I'd been dabbling with Node and started messing with like sockets and stuff and just Node scripts. And after a while, it was like I really didn't like the schism across browsers. This was a couple years ago before they all sort of unified, and green evergreen browsers weren't a thing back then. So I started doing Node scripts and server side, like just internal tooling for different companies. And now I'm kind of like, I don't know. I just do whatever I need to do for the job. It's just whatever project you're working on. But I think that's kind of how I started.
Gotcha. So it's interesting. I mean, you get in scripting. Usually that's not where I hear people get started. Usually it's either they were younger, older computer, started with BASIC, or they find it as an adult and they start learning it and then they get interested and build a career on it. So it's interesting, coming at it from where you're at. It's just a little bit different approach.
Well, I mean, I remember taking a Visual Basic class in high school, but what was cool for me was like the fastest way to have a product was HTML, CSS. You could just, with very little effort and a lot of bugs, have something that friends and family can check out and use and interact with. And even if like 5 of your friends were the only people who actually viewed it like once a month, the point was you could complete something. And I didn't really dig. It was a lot harder to learn like more true computer science languages, and especially to like create and release a product. And I was all about sharing with people. Like everything I do is for people. So web was definitely my go-to.
Yeah, that makes sense. What time frame was this? I mean, how new was the web? I don't have a good feel for how old you are.
Well, I'm 30 now. I think 15, 16 was like the DOS days. Uh-huh. I don't even remember Windows 3.1. I think I was like starting to code around Windows 98 SE, maybe later. That was even then. So
now
I remember dealing with Internet Explorer, and I started picking up Cake PHP when Chrome just came out. So I don't remember exactly when that was, but 1 or 2 years before Google Chrome was released, that was kind of where I really dug into, or a couple years before. God, I don't remember anymore. I think 2000 to 2005.
Gotcha. So I'm curious then, you mentioned, okay, I was doing Cake PHP and then Node came along. So how did you find Node, and what was it about it that made you want to move?
Well, I think everybody who was doing JavaScript found out about Node. Because if you're in the JavaScript world, it just massively evolved really rapidly. And it was like, you didn't have to build. I was previously used to building full MVC web apps, but sometimes you just wanted simple scripts. And you're like, well, I already know JavaScript, and why would I write a batch like file or something like that? And then after a while, I started looking for MVC frameworks in Node. And then I just realized they're kind of overblown, and it was just everything started shifting to client side heavy. So how did I find out about Node? I don't know. I just, when you're in the JavaScript world, you heard about it. It was very hard not to notice.
Okay, that makes sense. So what was it then? I mean, you mentioned MVC, but then you mentioned that it was kind of overblown. So what was it? What was it in Node that made you go, okay, you know what, Cake PHP is not my jam anymore?
Well, MVC in Node, which at the time, for me was Sales.js,
right,
was like, it was trying to get the job done. For me, I'm not like married to Node. I use whatever language technology I need.
Yep.
But if I was building a short script, JavaScript was easy to do. And it was just Cake PHP had limitations. It was slow. It was PHP. And I was like, there's all these PHP frameworks and everybody's arguing about who's the fastest. I'm going to switch over to pure JavaScript because there's no argument. Everybody uses jQuery. And now we have JavaScript frameworks fighting just like PHP frameworks. And now I'm like, I'm sick of this. It's really annoying. And even today, I used to love Angular. I jumped on Angular when it was 0.9. And
wow.
now I think it's 4 or something like that. And I was like, this is hands down the best framework, no argument, because React didn't exist at the time. And the funny thing is, I actually like Angular 1 better than all other frameworks. Angular 1 plus Angular UI's router, to this day, I still feel was one of the best combinations of like development environments, and all the complaints about performance. I was like, you just didn't understand the limitations of the framework or how to optimize. And you can run into problems in every single framework, but that combination for me lasted the longest and worked the best without any like the complexity kind of plateaued of my applications. And nowadays I'm like, well, React for me takes a lot of boilerplate, and Angular's pretty much just trying to copy React and takes a lot of boilerplate. So the closest thing I was looking at is the new Vue.js, but really I hate having to keep changing whatever language and framework you're using every 2 years. So I'm just like, whatever.
Nice. Gotcha. So, I mean, it's interesting to hear this take on things. Most people I talk to, they've kind of picked one framework, and so they'll talk about what they like about it. And it's kind of interesting to see where you come out with all this. I'd like to dig a little bit into Angular, mainly because we have Adventures in Angular podcast. I mean, what was it about Angular, back in the Angular 1 or Angular JS days that really appealed to you that got you to come over to that technology?
Well, I'm sure I covered most of this on the episode where you interviewed me, because I was gung-ho about Angular, and more importantly about the Angular UI organization I started, and we had the biggest router in Angular. And I still think that router we built was possibly the coolest part of Angular, and it just worked so well with Angular's. If you update variables or models or objects anywhere in the application, Angular just reflects those changes. And using shared objects, which is, I think, considered a taboo these days because everybody likes things to be immutable. Working with shared objects and shared references in the UI router, which was a tree state machine, was just a super awesome concept that made everything. It just organized your application at scale in a way that felt really manageable and really sane. But the reason why I first jumped onto Angular was before that I tried creating a client-side application using jQuery, because the lead of my team said client-side JavaScript is where it's at now. Serve static HTML and do everything on the client, because nothing will get you better fast response times on your web page than static HTML. If you could serve a website with static text files, that'd be even better. But that was a nightmare. Async callback hell, waiting for 8 different libraries to all load before you started actually executing stuff. I looked at Backbone and Spine and a bunch of other ones, and they were just also nightmares. The JavaScript was so tightly coupled to the DOM. And then Angular was like, this literally takes the least number of lines of code. I built a form generator in like 40 lines or 50 lines of JavaScript, 50 lines of HTML. And I was like, this is by far the fastest way to develop. It's the most straightforward. And it was really, I think, declarative bindings, like moving a lot of structure into your HTML declaratively. Because the one thing, you deal with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and your CSS, people have learned these days with Bootstrap and these frameworks that it may take a little bit more boilerplate to build Bootstrap components or foundation components in your HTML. But the benefit is refactoring only needs to be done in your HTML. And your HTML is your view, and it's always going to be the most amount of code and the most amount of refactoring. Somebody's going to come along and say, move this around. And the best way to build your app is never needing to touch your CSS, because you're just changing your HTML structures around, and getting that same benefit with JavaScript where you don't have to touch your JavaScript to change your interactions with it. That's again, you're only touching the HTML. So you're really removing most of your refactoring necessity into your HTML.
Right. That's interesting. So so you came on, you talked about Angular UI and you've mentioned the Angular UI router and all the stuff, and then the payoffs there. I'm also curious, why didn't you come along then to Angular 2? I mean, you mentioned that it was kind of they're trying to copy React. And I've heard that from a few people. And I've heard various reasons for it. I'm just curious, where you're coming from and then what you moved to, what you're doing now.
Well, I both like and dislike every framework there is. And I think the one thing I've learned these days is don't be a zealot. Have a good general knowledge. I know how the React rendering engine works under the hood. I know how the Angular one works under the hood. I've built personal projects using React because I needed the rendering engine from React, and Angular's rendering engine was super slow for what I was trying to do. But I didn't like Angular's evolution because I wasn't a huge fan of directives, which are the equivalent to React components. I still don't like this massive number of components because I feel like when people break down like 5-line components, 8-line components, they were just super duper heavily tied to DOM structure, and they're super duper tightly coupled to each other. And half the time you're passing data through 3 or 4 components, and like 2 or 3 of the items in the middle, the components in the middle, don't even interact with the data or know what to do with it. So you create a lot of this just really tightly coupled structures. And I remember jumping into a new code base when I was interviewing for a job, and I'm like, I just felt like I was constantly going into a component and then finding I actually have to jump into another component, And I found it maddening. And in Angular, it was really hard to write directives or components in one. And I highly recommended people not do so because it meant you were trying to build like view utilities and widgets. And I said, try and reuse other people's, resort to creating your own widgets like at the very end. And I've put a heavy emphasis on the router, which was a state machine. And I said, create states in your application. Like you really want to focus on when I'm viewing a list, that's a state. And then the details of one record in the list is a substate of the list. And then editing the details is like a substate of that. And at the time, there was this very clear distinction between application states, which were tree and hierarchical. There was inheritance built into the state system that was separate from Angular's scope inheritance. So it was a lot more declarative. You would declare these are the dependencies I have, and the state machine would actually resolve all of your data dependencies in a tree fashion. So if your data dependency resolutions depended on other data dependencies, the router would actually optimize and organize and pull in the data. It would try and parallelize all of the resolution, but if it had to, it would sequentialize any of those things. And every time you needed access to data, you could explicitly declare it as a dependency, but you didn't have to. So it was like, it was just a really nice way of, if you knew a really good way of organizing your code and knew the pros and cons of using scope data, using resolved data, using data that you assume is there, which is like scope is kind of like this, it's like this inheritance thing that's like implicit, whereas resolved data is kind of an explicit dependency. And I kind of came up with this approach that just felt really, really nice to work with, where you can kind of move your data from a more implicit area to an explicit area. And you had a dependency injection system that really took care of a lot of stuff. And the dependency injection system was hierarchical too, but it was tied to your application state. And if you tie the data, how you get your data in your application to what state you are in the application, and the state system is a tree, it made it really easy to just kind of organize things. It's probably getting really specific and confusing, but that was what I loved. And the future of Angular and React was all about build components. Everything's a component, build more components. And I used to advocate against that because I felt like you should be resolving data and then putting it on the view, and then pretty much the rest of your code should be HTML. You really should not be touching your JavaScript at all if you can.
Right.
And yeah, the new future is like different.
So we talked a little bit about Angular and Angular UI. Are there parts of that you're particularly proud of having worked on, or anything else in JavaScript or Angular that you want to mention? Hey, I did this, it was cool.
I'm very proud of the organization. The one thing Angular UI tried to bring to Angular was unity of the community before Google opened it up to the community.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like it just brought a lot of people together. Like even the React, the router we built was issue number one is just a huge 1,000 comment discussion of a bunch of people discussing different types of routers and different types of approaches. And they all figured out and built this really awesome solution. And that's my favorite project. And I didn't even write it. The only thing that I find at the same time frustrating about Angular UI is we couldn't figure out how to maintain momentum. We weren't getting funding. Some people offered to pay us, but it wasn't like enough to be useful. And I didn't know who to send it to. I didn't have the time and the energy to manage all the projects and things like that. So it was like both a success and a failure. I don't think Angular UI is that active. Like some projects are active, but they've kind of forked onto their own namespaces. And I kind of wished I'd figure out a way to get that project keep going on its own, kind of like how jQuery did. But
right.
I think a lot of open source people struggle with burnout and like keeping things going after they've left. So I built a lot of random stupid projects, but Angular UI is definitely one of the biggest things I've ever done. And it's, to me, what's important isn't what the code was, but the community it like really had going with it, and just connecting all these people in a way that they were all collaborating, and versus this community of people competing with my components better than your version of the exact same component sort of thing.
So I want to kind of veer. You talked a little bit about sustainability. So
I have no solutions around that. I'm not a good person to talk to about that because my entire life has been burnout and new exploration. So the best thing I have to say about sustainability is no matter what, your code is going to be bad in 2 months and useless in 2 years. So don't like kill yourself over it. And that's not a good thing to say about sustainability, but I don't know the trick to sustainability with code.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I've talked to a few other people about it, so maybe I'll do some picks at the end of the show. But it's definitely not a solved problem, that's for sure.
One thing I will say that in all my years of working in JavaScript and development that I constantly teach to as many people as I can is I've learned the most important like aspect of code. Like people say, oh, you should be perfectly documented. You should get 100% unit tests. Like the most important thing for me is refactorability. Everything else kind of leads towards refactorability. And no matter what, all code will inevitably need to be refactored. So any like documentation, unit tests, those are all good, but they all lead to a very easy to refactor code base. And anything you can do to kind of go towards that direction for me has always felt the best way to approach things. And that's why I like the state machine router. It was very easy to refactor. It was very refactor friendly focused. And it just was the most rewarding thing to work with. And then another guy was working on the back end, and that was terribly unrewarding because it was outside the scope of my control.
Yep. Cool. Well, what are you doing now?
Well, I work for PlayStation on PlayStation Vue, which is a YouTube TV competitor, although we were first. Yeah. It's pretty cool. The nice thing is I'm on an internal tooling team. So although a lot of the PlayStation teams are Ember, and then we have some native like Objective-C for Apple TV and stuff like that. There's a lot of Ember clients. I'm not a huge fan of Ember. I'm even less so a fan of Ember after working with Ember and struggling to figure out how to get some of the benefits I used to have in Angular and Ember, and realizing it's just shoehorning. But what I do now is mostly Node and JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, and small library maintenance. And it's kind of cool because I can jump into client frameworks and put stuff together, but really I'm just focused on keeping well-maintained. I get to look at things at a high-level architectural internal thing, and I don't tend to deal too much with the day-to-day HTML, CSS, nuances, and I mostly build stuff and then distribute it, and then other people have to figure out how to deal with asinine bugs. But when I'm not doing that, I actually do a bunch of art projects, and I only mention this because this Thursday, I'm going to a movie premiere at Mann's Chinese Theater in Hollywood for a film project I've been working on. So I do a bunch of random stuff outside of programming these days. The part of why I went to PlayStation, reduce my work hours and increase my social life.
That's really cool. Do you want to talk a little bit about this project, or?
So the project I worked on, I'm an editor for. It's called The Tolls. It's a Nazi kind of parallel reality science fiction short film, 20 minutes. I don't think you can find it online anywhere right now, but if you look at the problem is we don't have like a go-to landing page that I'm aware of, but look for The Tolls by Wiley on Facebook. I'll provide some links, but we've been in a couple of film. We're doing the festival circuit, and for me that's super cool because filmmaking is one of my many hobbies, and I have a film airing at Mann's Chinese Theater, so super excited to go check that out.
That's really cool. Yeah, this episode will come out long after it's been aired there, but yeah, if you can give us some links, then we'll definitely post them so people can go check out this or maybe other projects you've got going.
Cool. Yeah, I can do that.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's the one thing I'm sorry, coming up with a work-life balance has been one of the things as advice I give to a lot of open source people. Like, you really, really gotta appraise what's going to last a while. And working on art projects has been a lot of fun to help balance out my open source and coding work.
Yep.
So.
No, I totally get it. I mean, I spend time doing Boy Scouts of America and, a handful of other things, and some of them are causes that I really believe in, and some of them are just, I just kind of need to bang on stuff with tools for a while. So I repair my own cars, for example. And,
that's awesome.
For me, it's the same thing. So I totally get it. And I think a lot of times we neglect to talk about that, right? It's, oh, well, what are you doing? And what do you do in your spare time? Well, I do open source in my spare time. And then, I talk to somebody a year later and they're like, oh, I totally burned out on that and the next project. And now I'm on the next thing that I'm going to burn out on in 6 months.
Yeah. I think for open source, it got frustrating because you can't share it with people outside the tech world.
Yeah.
And I've been doing it so long, you go to people and they ask you what technology or library or framework you're working in, and it's just, after so long, it just feels like more of the same. And I know it's just going to change in a year or two because it just evolves so quickly. And while that's cool, I realized don't focus on having 100-minute test coverage in every single feature you were ever asked in your libraries. Focus on I still care about quality of work and quality of code because, again, my number one concern when it comes to writing code is refactorability. But the point of all of that stuff is your end product. If you're not building a product, you're going to burn out. And if you don't care about the product, you're going to burn out. And if you're not managing your work-life balance, and there's one piece of advice I want to give to any person in the programming world. If you ever have other projects outside of programming or activities, say yes to them, because you'll always have all those times they fall through to work on your code and your projects. And also, once it's in your calendar, your schedule, don't cancel them, period. You can work on programming anytime you want. If you get an opportunity to go to a movie, go to music, work on art, work on anything else, say yes, put it in your calendar, and do not break those commitments. And that will help you reduce your burnout. You might not build applications that fast, but unless you're going to start a company and you've willing to put all your time and energy and money and commitment into it, then remember to balance your life and make sure you're not going to be on your deathbed being like, I really wish I had 100% unit test coverage or I worked every hour.
Yep. Sounds good. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Do you have some things you want to shout out about? Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Last Friday, I gave a talk at my company for wallaby.js. Uh-huh. It has literally evolved my approach to programming. I'm not even going to get into it too much, but it will make you ridiculously fast at programming. And it's just like, it's life-changing. They've got a plugin for every IDE. An individual license costs $100. Try the trial, totally worth it. Maybe the dude will hook me up for name dropping him, but that thing is awesome. And I already mentioned the film I've been working on. I don't think I have anything else right now that's super stirring in my head.
Cool. We've been trying to get the guy from Wallaby.js on JavaScript Jabber for a while, and yeah, so hopefully we'll come out with something like that soon. All right, I'm going to jump in here with a couple of picks myself. It's funny, I do so many of these shows, and I've mentioned this before on the shows, that I run out of things to pick.
Well, for me, can you tell me what your favorite pick or your most recurring pick would be of all the other episodes?
You know, I tend to come back when I pick stuff. I tend to keep coming back to Brandon Sanderson's novels.
Oh, I love Brandon Sanderson.
So
everything he makes is awesome.
Yep. Well,
but I've started to realize all of his books are kind of a little bit too similar to each other now that I've read most of them.
Yeah, a lot of them are. I mean, the magic system changes and, you know, things like that, but they tend to have the same cadence and the same pattern of, you know, stuff happens, stuff doesn't happen, stuff happens, stuff doesn't happen. Yeah.
I've realized my favorite thing about novels, especially sci-fi fantasy novels, is really good world building authors. Like Harry Potter's great because there's so much detail to the world and they create rules and explanations behind these normally fantastical things. They don't just say he magicked away a problem because that's very Deus Ex Machina. Yeah. And Sanderson always puts rules into his universes. And you don't feel like the author is just coming up with hand-waving explanations as to why characters can do things. There's always like a logical grounding for everything, and I love that. Everything's in Brandt's. He always has this approach that's very material, and I forget what the word is, but like chemical-based explanations for all the magic.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, there are definitely. It's almost like the rules of physics applied to magic.
Yeah.
And in fact, Brandon also has a podcast where he talks about authoring fiction. That he does with a bunch of other folks. By the way, one of the things that I've been really wanting to do is just meet Brandon. He actually lives in Provo, which is 20 minutes away.
Oh man!
But
what's a podcast called? I want to go check this out.
It's called Writing Excuses.
Oh,
and they've been doing it for a number of years. So anyway, it's terrific. So I'll shout out about that as well. They also have a conference that they pulled together. It's called Life, the Universe, and Everything. I'm pretty sure they hold it here in Utah. So you can check that out. And I think they also do a cruise, which is a writing workshop that runs for about a week. So they've got all kinds of stuff going on that's really, really awesome. So yeah, maybe I'll just talk about that here for a minute.
That's pretty cool. Can I throw out one more because you reminded me of one?
Yeah, go ahead.
I started a podcast. But there's only a pilot, so I haven't been marketing it yet. I'm still trying to record. I want people to come on, if you're in the Bay Area, to record the episodes. It's a dating podcast called You Suck at Dating. And it's the name is influenced from You Suck at Photoshop, but the podcast is about getting two guys and two girls to communicate and empathize and really, like, I think the problem with dating, which is something I deal with a lot, is that people don't really communicate very well anymore. And it's like trying to have those drunken like epiphanies about philosophy and not about that terrible date you had. And I trying to get people to come on it. I've only got one episode, but that's my podcast throughout.
Hey, there we go. Yeah, go check that out. This will come out in a couple of months, so hopefully you'll have more stuff out by then. One other thing that I'm going to pick, and I know that it's going to turn some people off because it's more of a political pick, but it's a book I've been reading lately. The things that he brings up, I think he harshes on stuff a little bit too much, but I tend to lean a little bit more to the right politically in the U.S. Than the left. And there's a book out there. I've had a number of people. They ask, well, how did Trump win? How is it that people voted for Donald Trump and why? And I think a lot of the answers are going to come out in this book if you go read it. It's a book by Ben Shapiro. I know a lot of people don't like him. Whatever your feelings are. If you want to understand it and you want to understand how a lot of people feel, I felt some of it, but not all of it. So I wouldn't go as far as he did in the book. But it's called Bullies by Ben Shapiro. So if you're interested in that, then go read that. I'm also kind of an equal opportunity offender on this stuff. I hate the Democrats and I hate the Republicans. So I agree. I'm a centrist. I'm not a centrist. I just feel like they both lie to you about different things, and neither of them really give me what I want. And so, anyway,
maybe centrist is the wrong term, but I agree with you.
Yeah,
I think everybody's kind of like forgotten how to have constructive arguments and constructive, empathetic conversations, and everybody's echo chambering, preaching their propaganda, and both parties have kind of gone down the drain.
Yep. But another book that I'm going to throw out there, and I understand that there are some there are issues with this particular author and the way that he sourced some of the material for the book. But the next book that I'm going to read is Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff. So again, if you're kind of interested in where both, and I feel like you can't demonize the other side without trying to understand them. And so I really try not to do that. And so even though I lean way off to the right politically in the U.S., I think there's something to be said for, go pick up the stuff that the people that have their value system 180 degrees opposite yours, and just go see what they're talking about. And don't be dismissive. Just see, okay, how could they wind up getting to where they are?
You can't convince somebody about your side of an argument if you have no interest in even considering their side. That's the fundamental problem with people arguing these days. Nobody wants to go into it with the possibility of them changing their mind.
Right.
So
yeah,
I like it. I'll check those out.
So anyway, so I'll throw those out. Like I said, you have to go check the facts on all these things, but yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and pick those. Last time I picked a book by any kind of political personality, I had people come after me on Twitter saying, how could you pick a book by that person? And you know what? I liked the book. So anyway, if people want to follow you on Twitter or Facebook or GitHub, or maybe you have a blog somewhere, where is all that stuff, Dean?
On GitHub, I'm not super active, but my developer handle is ProLoser, PROLOSER. If you search for my name on Google, you'll find pretty much everything. Facebook, Twitter, it's all under J Sofer or ProLoser, and I'll show up somewhere.
All right, sounds good. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and we'll have another JavaScript story for you next week. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.